School bus filled with 26 children, all kidnapped and buried alive. This is the largest case of mass kidnapping in American history. The Chowchilla kidnapping. This is one of the most bizarre true crime cases. You're gonna think that I'm telling you the plot of a movie. Ed Ray was the school bus driver that fateful day in California in 1976. He's driving his normal bus route. He's driving on a more rural stretch of land when he notices a white van stopped in the middle of the road. Thinking that maybe they're experiencing some kind of car trouble, he pulls over to try and help them, and that's when two men get out of the van. They have nylon stockings over their heads and they're carrying large weapons, and they start approaching the school bus. Ed has 26 children on his school bus, ranging in ages from 5 years old to 14 years old, and he's terrified if he makes one wrong move that these men are going to open fire on all these children. So for the time being, he complies with whatever they say. The two men hijack the school bus and begin driving it away, while a third kidnapper is following behind them in the white van. They drove to a secluded area, and that's when they loaded the 26 children and the school bus driver Ed into two vans, and then they drove those vans 12 hours. And the back of the vans are completely boarded up, so they're in these vans for 12 hours in total darkness. Can you even imagine the fear and confusion? Ed is the only adult in the situation, trying his best to be responsible for 26 children, try and keep them calm and keep them safe. And meanwhile, back home, dozens of parents are realizing that their children have not come home from school. The authorities find the school bus just abandoned in that secluded area, and now there's massive panic. Everyone knew about this for miles. Could you even imagine 26 children and their bus driver just all vanishing into thin air? And the phone lines are absolutely being blown up with hundreds of calls. People are calling in with tips or theories. The media is calling. Concerned family members and community members are calling. The phones are ringing off the hook. Meanwhile, the children and Ed have been in the back of this van driving for 12 hours. They're taken over 100 miles away from home. And then the van stops. And the three men, they come, open the door, and they take Ed, and then they slam the door. And then a while later, they go back and they take another child and then slam the door. And then a bit later, they go and take another child and they slam the door, and this continues. And the people, the children that are still left in the van, have no idea what's happening to their friends or if they're even alive. Luckily, they were all alive. The three kidnappers took them all, each one by one, asked them what their names were, then made them remove what they were wearing, and then directed them to climb down into a hole that they had buried underground. The three kidnappers had buried a small moving van underground, and it was small, 27 feet long, and now there's 27 people in it. There was dirty mattresses on the ground, a small amount of food and water, and then the kidnappers took one single roll of toilet paper, threw it down at them, and then told the 26 children and Ed that they would be back for them later, and then covered the hole with a manhole grate. I keep going back to how terrifying this situation would be for anyone, but this is happening to children as young as 5 years old. And then they hear dirt being thrown on top of that manhole cover. They are being buried alive 12 feet underground. And you're probably all wondering what kind of monsters are doing this. Well, you might be surprised to learn that these three kidnappers are all in their early 20s and extremely wealthy. For context, the ringleader in this mass kidnapping scheme, Fred Woods' family made $80 million the year this happened in 1976, which would be almost $400 million in today's money. And Fred's accomplices were brothers named James and Richard Schoenfeld, and they also came from a wealthy family, but all three men were lazy and did not want to work and were being cut off from daddy's money. They're all in massive debt, but they're lazy. They don't want to work. They want a get-rich-quick scheme, and that's how they came up with the idea to kidnap a school bus full of children so they could ask the state of California for a $5 million ransom for the children's safe return. And they planned this out for about a year and a half. And after they buried the 26 children and Ed underground, they went back home to call the authorities and make the ransom demand. But remember, the phones are ringing off the hook with those hundreds of calls of tips and the media and concerned citizens. So their call for ransom demand could not go through. The three men decided that they were just going to try and call later. And in the meantime, they would take a little nap. You know, they had such a long day, but they napped so long, in fact, that Ed and the 26 children had been buried underground for over 12 hours, and they were running out of air. The small amount of food and water that the kidnappers have left for them, it was gone. The chances of them even getting out of this hole alive to be given up for ransom were looking slim. It had been over 12 hours and the kidnappers never came back like they said they would, and this just shows the amount of bravery and the will to survive that these children had, because they were going to get out of here. They began stacking those mattresses that were thrown on the ground on top of each other, and then started to stand on each other's shoulders so they could reach that manhole cover 12 feet above them. The oldest of the children was a 14-year-old boy named Michael Marshall, and he was able to kind of wiggle the manhole a little bit. So Ed, the bus driver, he climbs up and he holds it open to him just a little bit so that Michael was able to go in and wedge a piece of wood so he's able to wiggle the manhole actually off. The kidnappers had also put a heavy wooden box on top of the manhole, so 14-year-old Michael starts bashing at the wood and tearing at it with his bare hands until 16 hours after they were first imprisoned, he sees sunlight. 14-year-old Michael has just freed them. He's so brave because he's the first one to leave the hole, and he has no idea if the kidnappers are going to be out there waiting for him. And then Ed lifts each child one by one to Michael until they're all free. All 27 of them are outside of the hole, and now they're looking around and they're in the middle of nowhere. There's just rolling California hills surrounding all of them. They're in this like mining area. They actually have been buried under a rock quarry, and there was an employee at the rock quarry that was about to go home. His shift was over, and he sees these 26 children and Ed just wandering around and realizes that they are the kidnapped children that everyone's been talking about. And when Dumb and Dumber finally wake up from their nap, they see on the news that, oh, all our kidnapping victims have been found alive. They tried to flee the country. It was actually extremely easy to identify that these men were the ones who did this, because the rock quarry that they were all buried under, it belonged to Fred's father, and Fred had been seen by multiple employees digging holes at the rock quarry, and since Fred really only hung out with the Schoenfeld brothers, they were easy suspects. And their homes were just filled with evidence, including all of the kidnapped children's names just written on a fast food bag. They found a draft of the ransom letter, and then they also found a document just titled Plan that documented and described all of their plan in a lot of detail. All three men were eventually brought into custody and charged with 27 counts of kidnapping and 5 counts of kidnapping with bodily harm. A lot of the children were actually brave enough to testify and face their kidnappers, and all three men were found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But all three men were able to successfully appeal the bodily harm charges because, technically they didn't beat them or anything. But all, or at least most of the children and Ed suffered with lifelong PTSD, trauma, anxiety, on top of the fact that they almost died down in that hole and they had to fight their way out to survive. But the court system decided that they did not count as bodily harm enough. So their sentences were all reduced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, and today all men have been released on parole. Richard was released in 2012, James was released in 2015, and Fred was released pretty recently in 2022. I know you guys are going to have a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts about this case. If you guys are still with me, thank you, because I know this was a long one. I'm going to be reading all your guys' comments, replying to as many as I can. Let me know all your thoughts and opinions on this case. I know they'll be strong. And also while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much. You have no idea, and I will see you tomorrow.